Ever get that feeling that there's more to reality than meets the eye? A sense of a deeper connection, maybe. A longing to understand how everything fits together beyond, the surface level.
Yeah, definitely.
It feels like this universal human itch, this quest for a direct experience of ultimate reality, something I think many of us just intuitively feel or are kind of curious about.
That's absolutely right. This fundamental human desire to go beyond the superficial, to tap into the interconnectedness of everything. It's a theme you see again and again throughout history.
Well,
It
right.
just pops up in different forms, doesn't it? Across
Yeah.
so many spiritual traditions, philosophical explorations. Everyone's trying to understand this deep yearning in their own way.
And that's precisely what we're diving into today. Our mission, really, is to explore this core human quest through two incredibly interesting figures who, well, on the surface, couldn't seem more different.
Okay.
We've got Marguerite, a medieval French mystic, the Beguine, actually, and then Helena Blavatsky, the 19th century co-founder of the Theosophical Society.
Wow. Yes. Centuries apart, completely different cultural worlds. France in the Middle Ages versus, the late 19th century globe-trotting theosophy. Big difference.
Huge difference. But what's really striking, and this is what grabbed us, is that despite these vast gaps in time and background, their key works.
Uh-huh.
Porette's The Mirror of Simple Souls, and Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence. They actually share some truly remarkable core ideas.
That is fascinating because those texts come from such different places.
Exactly. Porette's Mirror is this amazing dialogue, almost like a spiritual play, mapping out the soul's journey toward what she calls a lasting union of indistinction with God.
Lasting union of indistinction. Powerful phrase.
Isn't it? And Blavatsky's voice, on the other hand, it presents itself as ancient wisdom from the East, guidance for seekers aiming for enlightenment, for union with their own higher self.
Okay, so one framed very much in Christian mystical terms, the other explicitly drawing on Eastern traditions.
Right. And here's the really intriguing bit, the core idea we want to dig into. Despite the different origins, the different language, both texts seem to describe paths to achieving this really profound state of unified consciousness.
Unified consciousness. So, like, getting beyond the feeling of being separate.
Exactly. A state where the individual self, the ordinary ego, is somehow transcended, where that feeling of separateness dissolves into a connection with a more fundamental reality. That's the common ground we see.
Okay, I'm with you. So let's start there with that ultimate goal. For Porete, you mentioned this lasting union of indistinction with God. She says the soul becomes God by the condition of love. That sounds, well, pretty radical for medieval Europe.
Extremely radical.
Huh.
I mean, think about it. The idea that a human soul could become one with God in such a direct, almost indistinguishable way. That was a seriously bold statement for her time and place.
Absolutely. Within that medieval Christian context, Porete's vision, where the boundary between human and divine seems to just dissolve, it was revolutionary. Becoming God by the condition of love suggests, like, a direct participation in God's essence. That definitely challenged some established theological lines.
For sure. And then you jump forward centuries to Blavatsky, and her goal is framed as union with a higher self, this kind of inner spark of divinity she believed is within everyone.
Right, the focus shifts inward, in a sense.
Yeah, it's about tuning into and hearing the voice of the silence, this soundless sound that's supposed to exist at a deeper level.
Right.
And the potential outcome, the realization that thou art Buddha.
Thou art Buddha. So again, achieving a kind of ultimate identity, but using Buddhist terminology, different language, different tradition, but still this profound merging with something greater than the everyday self.
Exactly. So if you step back, you see both pointing towards a state beyond the limits of the individual ego, a reunification with a bigger reality.
Yeah.
Porete uses the language of God. Blavatsky uses higher self, Buddha, terms rooted in Eastern thought. But that fundamental drive towards non-separateness, it feels remarkably consistent.
Okay, so that's the destination. But what about the journey? What kind of radical transformation do they say is needed to get there? Porete talks about the annihilated soul. That sounds intense.
It does, doesn't it? Complete surrender of individual will, desires, even your sense of self-identity. It sounds quite extreme.
It sounds extreme, but Porette's annihilated soul is, well, it's a central concept for her. This idea of reaching a kind of nothingness through this radical surrender.
Nothingness.
Yeah, but think of it maybe like emptying a cup. You have to empty it completely so it can be filled by something much bigger, much more profound. Someone summed it up as her self-annihilation is the portal to her deification.
Ah, okay, so the emptying makes space.
Exactly. Letting go of the limited self to be filled, essentially, by the divine. This nothingness isn't about, just blinking out of existence. It's framed as a kind of liberation from the ego's constraints.
That's a helpful image, emptiness, as a
Yeah.
doorway to fullness.
Mm.
And Blavatsky has something parallel, right? The need to slay the slayer.
Yes. The slayer being that lower analytical mind, the part of us that constantly creates illusions, what she, using the Sanskrit term, calls Maya. It blocks our access to genuine understanding.
Maya, illusion. So the mind itself can be the problem.
That's how she sees it, or at least that aspect of the mind. She actually wrote, "Mind is like a mirror. It gathers dust while it reflects."
Gathers dust.
Yeah, it needs the gentle breezes of soul wisdom to brush away the dust of our illusions. So the work involves actively, gaining control over and ultimately moving beyond this mind aspect that builds up a false picture of reality.
Okay, so it seems like, well, Porete talks about annihilation in relation to the divine, and Blavatsky talks about slaying the mind in a more maybe psychological or esoteric way.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying point is strikingly similar, isn't it? Both see the ego, our attachment to this idea of a separate self as the main barrier, the big obstacle to deeper spiritual experience. They just come at dismantling it from slightly different angles.
That seems right. Which then raises the question, how do they describe the actual journey? Is it like a sudden flash, or is it more step by step?
Porete lays out 7 stages for the soul's ascent to perfection.
7 stages. Okay.
Yeah, it's presented as a gradual process of letting go.
Yeah.
She even talks about specific states like knowing nothing and willing nothing.
Knowing nothing and willing nothing. That sounds very Zen, almost, like a structured path, a kind of spiritual curriculum. And Blavatsky also describes stages, doesn't she?
She does. He talks about the 3 halls the soul passes through: ignorance, learning, and wisdom. And then there are the 7 portals. Yeah, the 7 portals are essentially the paramitas, these virtues or perfections from Mahayana Buddhism like charity, morality, patience, wisdom, qualities you have to cultivate to progress. Ah, okay. So both are definitely mapping out a journey with distinct phases or practices. It's not just poof, you're there.
Exactly. The fact that both present these structured paths really suggests that this profound realization isn't usually, instantaneous. It's more often described as a gradual process of inner work, transformation, purification, developing certain inner qualities.
And what guides you on this path? For Porete, it really seems to be divine love. That's the driving force leading beyond reason itself. She has that incredible line.
Which one?
I am God, says love. For love is God, and God is love.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement about the nature of reality itself.
It really is. Porete puts divine love right at the center. It's the active principle, the very essence of God drawing the soul into union, a force beyond just intellectual understanding.
Right. And Blavatsky, she stresses the doctrine of the heart, doesn't she? Inner wisdom over just learning things.
Precisely. The doctrine of the heart, inner intuitive wisdom, is seen as far superior to the doctrine of the eye, which stands for external learning, dogma, just intellectual knowledge.
The eye versus the heart.
Yeah. And that voice of the silence, the inner guide itself, is something accessed through inner work, specifically through focused concentration, dharana.
So in both cases, there's this strong emphasis on inner, direct knowing, what some call gnosis. That seems way more important to them than just intellectual belief or following external rules. It's about a personal, lived understanding.
Exactly. That's a really fascinating shared thread, this insistence on inner lived experience as the real key to unlocking these deeper spiritual truths.
Okay, now here's where it gets maybe a bit tricky, or at least raises some questions. Porete suggests the annihilated soul actually takes leave of the virtues.
Yes.
That part.
It sounds like she's saying traditional morality just doesn't apply anymore once you reach that state, which, could sound dangerous.
It's definitely a point that caused controversy, and you can see why. But the interpretation usually isn't that the annihilated soul becomes, like, amoral or can just do bad things.
Okay, so what is the idea then? The idea is more that their actions become so perfectly aligned with the divine will, which is the source of all goodness, that virtue becomes, automatic, a natural expression of their unified being.
Like a master musician playing beautifully without thinking about scales.
That's a great analogy. The technique is so ingrained, the connection's so deep, that the beautiful music just flows. Virtue isn't something they try to do. It's just what happens naturally from that state of union.
Right, okay. So it's not a license to ignore ethics, but a description and action flowing from a state of complete alignment with goodness itself. Yeah. That makes more sense. Now, Blavatsky seems quite different here. She really emphasizes actively cultivating the paramitas, the virtues.
Yes, very much so.
Especially for the bodhisattva path, helping others. It seems like a core practice for her.
Absolutely central. Blavatsky's system puts huge emphasis on developing these virtues: generosity, ethical conduct, patience, energy, meditation, wisdom. Cultivating character is seen as completely integral to spiritual growth, and particularly vital for anyone aspiring to the bodhisattva ideal, which is all about working for the enlightenment of all beings, not just oneself.
Okay, so on the surface, it looks like Porete says you leave the virtues, in a sense, while Blavatsky says you absolutely must cultivate them. Seems like a contradiction.
It does seem that way at first glance.
But maybe. Maybe they're not totally opposed. Could it be that Porete is describing the state of achieved union, where virtue just flows, while Blavatsky is outlining the essential practices and ethical training needed to actually get to such a state, especially if your goal includes helping others along the way?
That's a really insightful way to look at it.
Yeah.
It's quite possible Porete is describing the destination spontaneous goodness from total union, while Blavatsky is detailing the necessary steps on the path, the ethical groundwork, particularly for the compassionate path of the bodhisattva. One the state, the other the way to the state, perhaps.
You could bridge that gap, couldn't it? Okay, let's shift focus slightly. How do they view reality itself and how we can know it? Porete seems very apophatic, knowing God through unknowing.
Yes, her mysticism is deeply apophatic. It emphasizes that God, in his ultimate essence, is beyond all human concepts, all descriptions.
So you could only say what God isn't.
In a way, yes. The journey involves letting go of our limited mental boxes, our definitions. This unknowing knowing is about encountering the divine beyond our concepts. It's like trying to grasp something infinite by realizing the limits of your finite mind, stripping away ideas to make space for direct encounter.
A plunge into God by taking away concepts. Okay? And Blavatsky, again, there's a parallel, right? With the mind being the slayer of the real.
Definitely. Blavatsky also points squarely at the limitations of our everyday perception and our conceptual mind.
The mind gets in the way again.
Yes, caught in Maya, the illusion that the material world and our separate selves are the final reality, it obscures the true nature of things. So reaching Sat, which means truth or reality in Sanskrit, requires transcending these mental illusions.
And that soundless sound she mentions.
That symbolizes a level of awareness, a reality that's beyond our ordinary senses and mental chatter. A deeper truth you access through inner transformation, not through the usual ways of knowing.
So the common thread again, it seems to be that our normal way of seeing and understanding is inherently limited. Flawed, even.
Pretty much. Both Porete and Blavatsky strongly suggest a deeper reality exists beyond these limits, and accessing it requires a specific kind of inner shift, a transformation of consciousness.
It really makes you wonder how these ideas connect to other spiritual paths. Do we see echoes elsewhere?
Oh, absolutely. The parallels are fascinating. Take Porete's union with God.
Yeah.
It resonates really strongly with Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism. The idea of Atman, the individual soul, being ultimately identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. It's that core concept of non-duality, fundamentally. The individual and the ultimate source aren't separate.
Then it's Brahman. That connection makes sense.
And Blavatsky's focus on slaying the mind and getting past Maya, illusion. That's also a cornerstone of Advaita Vedanta. Maya is the power that veils the true non-dual reality. So both are saying, look beyond the illusion created by the ordinary mind.
Okay, Vedanta fits well. What about Buddhism?
Lots of connections there, too. In Mahayana Buddhism, you have the concept of shunyata, emptiness.
Emptiness, right.
The idea that things lack inherent independent existence. This provides a lens for understanding Porete's annihilation, or Blavatsky's overcoming of selfhood. It's about seeing through the illusion of a solid, separate self.
Which connects to anatta, no self.
Exactly, the Buddhist doctrine of anatta, no permanent, unchanging self. And of course, Blavatsky's huge emphasis on the bodhisattva path, compassionately working to liberate all beings, is absolutely central to Mahayana Buddhism.
The bodhisattva ideal, yeah.
Plus, her stress on cultivating transcendental wisdom, praja, to achieve enlightenment directly mirrors the role of wisdom in Buddhist liberation.
So it's like these core ideas transcending the self, illusion, the path, wisdom, compassion, they keep bubbling up in different cultural forms. What about Gnosticism? That seems relevant too, with the focus on knowledge.
Very relevant. Gnosticism's core is gnosis, direct, experiential knowledge as the key to awakening. That lines up perfectly with Poret's emphasis on experiencing divine love directly and Blavatsky's heart doctrine.
Inner knowing again.
Yes, and the Gnostic idea of a divine spark trapped within each person, wanting to return to its source. That echoes Poret's soul becoming divine and Blavatsky's higher self.
The spark within.
And the whole Gnostic theme of liberation from a flawed material world, or at least a world of illusion, that resonates with Poret's transcendence of the mundane and Blavatsky's journey from asat, non-being or illusion, to sat, true being.
It's really striking. It feels like there's this, I don't know, this consistent undercurrent of mystical insight that just flows through different times and cultures. It gets expressed in different languages using different symbols, but the core seems remarkably similar.
Precisely. That's what's so compelling, this surprising convergence of fundamental ideas, ego transcendence, unitive experience, stages on a path, inner knowing despite the huge historical and cultural gulf between someone like Porete and someone like Blavatsky. It really does suggest a potential underlying unity in these kinds of deep mystical experiences.
So let's try to pull this together. We've seen this shared quest, this human longing for union with something bigger than just us. And this necessary, sometimes radical-sounding, process of letting go of the limited self, Poret's annihilation in God, Blavatsky's controlling or slaying the mind.
The transcendence of the ego, yeah.
And the crucial role of inner direct experience gnosis, heart doctrine love, really shines through in both, even if they approach the practical ethics bit with some interesting nuances that might actually complement each other.
Exactly. We've explored how both Marguerite Porete and Helena Blavatsky, using their own unique voices and vocabularies, map out a path beyond the ordinary self towards a more profound, interconnected reality. And seeing the parallels with Vedanta, Buddhism, Gnosticism, it just underlines how deep and universal this whole quest seems to be.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? About your own experiences, maybe. What are the implications of these ideas for how you understand yourself or reality? Does any of this letting go of the ego or quieting the mind, does that resonate with your own journey, your own aspirations?
Yeah, or how do you balance that inner sense of knowing with, all the external information and ideas coming at you? It's a really live question.
It absolutely is. This exploration really invites that kind of contemplation, doesn't it? Thinking about our own consciousness, the possibility of experiences beyond the everyday, questioning the boundaries of who we think we are and what reality might actually be like.
Definitely food for thought.
So if this deep dive into Marguerite Porete and Helena Blavatsky has sparked your curiosity, and I hope it has, we really recommend checking out their work. Poret's The Mirror of Simple Souls and Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence. They're incredibly rich, complex, and rewarding texts for anyone wanting to think more about these profound themes.